Well, Heidi-ho there, neighborinos. It's Bill Whittle on the Stratosphere Lounge for episode 122. My God, that's just an awful lot of hot air. Empower something useful with all of that wasted thermal energy. Anyway, it's good to be here. How are you guys? I hope everybody's doing well. It's a busy day in the neighborhood. You ever have those days when you feel like you're 15 minutes late for everything and you have to run like crazy and you're stuck in traffic and then if you don't get here, you're going to miss that and you're going to, that kind of horror. Yeah, that's pretty much my life every day. But I'm not complaining because it's better to be busy than not busy. And as we like to say in show business, having too much work to do is a high-class problem. We have intruder alert. So we're going to have to keep this one pretty quick tonight because we just shot the Brexit firewall just now. I'm kind of happy with it. There goes our operations manager sneaking into the back. And, we have an actual staff now. Thanks to all the new members that came in, we actually have a staff. And we try to get work done with it. And I feel really good about the work we've been cranking out. I mean, we've been just pounding it out. But there she is again. My God, this is a freaking Grand Central Station back here. Yeah, I mean, we've been really putting it out, but I just shot the new firewall, like 10 minutes ago. And then, first of all, I have to edit tomorrow's right angle and all that stuff. Our assistant editor's away on vacation. Speaking of vacations, I am going to Idaho for the 4th of July in a row, to visit my friend Bert Rutan, which I'll never get tired of saying. And I'm going to be flying up there in the Long Easy, which is far and away the longest flight I've ever taken with it. It'll be double the longest flight which I've taken in the plane, which was to Tucson. It's about 850 miles, something like that, maybe just 880 miles, somewhere in that general ballpark. It should take me about 6.5 hours in the air, somewhere in that vicinity, and that's going relatively easily. So I'll probably fly for 3 hours, stop somewhere around Redding or maybe Bend, Idaho, Oregon, somewhere in there. And then press on up to Coeur d'Alene, which is great because the last 4 times I've been to Coeur d'Alene, I keep imagining how nice it'd be to be in Coeur d'Alene with an airplane, and now I've got one, a fast one too. And it's a bird airplane, so he's never seen that, so that'll be a thrill. It's awfully late. There might still be a little bit of freedom up there. There's a fair chance, I hope, that they will let me do a flyover on the parade, which I think would be lovely and appropriate. But in any event, even if they don't, I'm flying the plane up, and then I am going to fly it back about a half an hour back to, I think it's Lewiston, I'm not sure, a town up there, and I'm going to leave it with one of our Long Easy guys, one of the best guys in the world, and he's going to start on the canopy. We found aircraft plastics will do it. I told you last week about Todd. I've been trying to upload that episode 3 times. It keeps failing on the automatic upload from Ustream, but I do have it on my desktop, so I guess I'm just going to have to crank it up there. That's about it. Big old flight coming up, and I'm looking forward to it. The first hour or two, probably 2 hours, going straight up the valley, the Central Valley. I'm somewhat familiar with it. I've flown it 4 or 5 times. But after I get past, Modesto, somewhere in there, I'm going to be seeing brand new things, so that's really exciting. So anyway, that's about it. So I'm going to have to go fairly quickly tonight so I can get back on the right angle show and then get started on the firewall, which I definitely need to have out by Friday because I'm going on Saturday. And I like it a lot. It's called Brexit and the 4th of July. And basically, it's saying, we got a really nice Independence Day birthday present from our parents, the Brits. They've shown us that this thing is not inevitable. That's the main point I took out of the Brexit thing. That's the thing that I sent a newsletter out when we got it. I was so ready to I did a newsletter on it. I was just when they first announced it. They announced that Remain had won. BBC announced it for a day. So when I found out that Leave had won, I just couldn't believe it. I'd already given up. So when I found out that Leave had won, I think it's the best news. Certainly it's the best news I've heard since Obama's been president, without question. It may be the best news in my life. It means that this inevitable slide towards this gray socialist collectivist future where a few unelected, incompetent, petty bureaucrats run everything for everybody else and keep taxing us more and regulating us more, it may just be possible just to stop it. Just like that. Bam. Nope, we're done. We're done. So in the firewall, I take a look at, I say there's 3 reasons why people left, and you'll get to see that hopefully by Friday. Members should get a chance to see it 24 hours early if we can, so that's always a nice benefit. Let's see. I think with that said and all the editing to do, I've got to get going on these questions, but I'm really looking forward to flying up to Idaho, and I'm really, really looking forward to going up there and picking up the plane again. He says it's probably going to take 4 or 5 weeks. I'm going to give it 3 months is what I'm going to estimate. It's a long time to go without flying, but to be perfectly honest with you, July and August in Los Angeles, it's not flying weather. Like, even, the canopy, it's not. Air's bumpy as hell. Surface temperature on the runways often 109 degrees, 112, something like that. Not fun at all. So I'm going to go up there and get the new canopy, and then I'll be happy camper and get the A10 star retractable gear in that baby, and she'll be ready to go. The F-59 Hummingbird. Very light attack aircraft. Small thermal and radar and audio signature. Remains on station for quick interdiction missions if you need to get in and out when you know where your target is and you know where they are and they're not going to be there for very long. Right in on the nap of the earth and put a little tack hammer missile on these guys and have a nice day. I really do need psychiatric help. I don't think there's any question about that by now. Here we go, episode 122 of the Stratosphere Lounge. Cheryl Twomey, who's just been so wonderful, just constantly sending me personal notes and messages and let me know when things are on fire or not on fire. Just one of the very best friends of the show and feel like a friend even though I haven't met her yet. So she had a question that was number 2 in rank, but I put it first because I thought it was so good. And the question is, to me, freedom is freedom-loving thinkers. Oh my gosh. Okay, I tried to get this printed, but it clipped the sides. We're having problems with our printer. So I'll just read it off the screen here. Cheryl's question is, to me, freedom is being able to have a TSL in the first place, a group of freedom-loving thinkers who do question our government without fear of reprisals. No questions today. I won't be watching since I'm still on vacation, but I'll be here in spirit. Happy Independence Day, Strata Loungers. I'll catch you on the upswing. It's a shame you couldn't be here for this, Cheryl, because it's such a great question. Excuse me. I've been corresponding with a friend of mine in Russia. She's a photographer, extremely talented, unbelievably talented photographer who does really romantic. They look like pictures of the Grand Duchesses. They're just so soft and they're so old world. They're just really talented person. And she said to me a couple occasions, you're just really brave. And I generally lost. It's like, but I haven't had a chance to even show off yet. No, she said, you be careful. You're criticizing your government and you're taking on some big people, and you're also, not being shy about how you feel about Islam when Islam decides to go into blood mode. And I have to tell you, I was really surprised by that. I was really quite surprised to hear her say that she thought that took real courage, physical courage, because I've never felt that it did. And that's why I like your question so much. And I think that's something we really should be remembering on this Independence Day, probably first and foremost, is that, we get to do shows like this, little shows, big shows. We get to live in a society where, despite how bad things have gotten, people like me and you and everybody who comments on the show and leaves comments anywhere, members, all of you, even if you just watch it, we still live in a country where you can say whatever you damn well want to about these charlatans, traitors, incompetents, weenies, and felons, and get away with it. It's astonishing, and I really needed to hear that from my friend in Russia, because it's not like that over there. It's so much better now than it used to be, but the history of the Tsar, which caused the revolution, the brutality of the Tsarist regimes caused the revolution. But what the Tsar was doing in the Tsar's prisons and the Tsar's punishments, the Bolsheviks made him look like Club Med. I mean, the Bolsheviks made his prisons look like Club Med. What the Bolsheviks did for 40 years, something like that, more than that, 50, 60, 70 years, is just do nothing but murder people. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating. The Soviet Union, under Stalin, with the Cheka and then later the OGPU, and then the became the KGB, and before that they were the somebody else I've forgotten. Those people didn't just murder. They didn't murder criminals. A criminal element, a person who was a murderer or a thief or something, would go to one of the camps, go to one of the gulags, and even though they were a criminal, they were not an enemy of the people. And one of the things that the Soviets figured out real early was that and it's true, I think, in some of the German camps too, we figured out that the Soviets figured out that, hey, if we send the criminals to the camps along with the political prisoners, then the criminals will be the enforcers because they're brutal and violent and they've got nothing to lose. And that's exactly what happened. The prisoners feared the criminals inside their cages with them more than they feared the guards. So I bring all this up only to say that it's hard for us to imagine what that does to you. And I don't mean just does to you in terms of people that lived under it. It does something to people whose parents lived under it. And I am actually really beginning to believe quite strongly that it's almost the inverse of the genetic selection that went on in the United States. I know that's you can't really say things like that, but I don't think there's really any question about it. They have found a gene that codes for risk-taking, among other things. And NSVD, thank you, Patrick. And KVD. Anyway, there apparently is a gene that codes for risk-taking. And that means that I bet if you sampled the U.S. population and the Russian population, I think you would find an enormous difference in that particular gene. In fact, I think what you'd find is the world norm would be somewhere down here. The U.S. population would have it much higher. Certainly 50 years ago, they had it just an enormously higher percentage of people carrying that gene. And I'll bet in Russia, it's a lot lower. And it's for the same reason. If you're tired of tyranny and you're one in 1,000 who wants to walk away from their little village and get on a boat, go to sail someplace they've never even seen before, let alone heard of or have a job, no, just going to get on a boat and go. We're going to give up everything. We'll probably never see our family again. We're going to go. So if all those risk takers come over here, you tend to leave the population with fewer risk takers, which at this point would be the world mean. But in the case of the Russians, where anybody who spoke up, anybody with any initiative, loyal citizens, they're doing it for the Soviet state, just somebody who stood up against the party, not even stood up against the party, made suggestions, that kind of thing. Nope, free thinkers, they were taken out and shot. So not only did we select for this risk-taking gene, which I think leads to freedom, and all of the fear that freedom brings to people in terms of having to take care of yourself. So we not only have a great deal more of it, I would say, but in Russia it was stamped out, it was just killed. And what they did is still so horrifying to me, and more horrifying than what they did to the Jews in Germany in a way, because it was just they were killing people statistically. They were using probability theory to kill people, even though they didn't really completely understand it in terms of the mathematics. They're very clear on the idea. So what they would do is, it wasn't like they just put dissidents in camps, and it wasn't like they just put people who'd either said anything against the state, or forget saboteurs and wreckers and all that stuff, but people who they didn't even put people who had committed simple crimes like criticizing the regime in prisons or shoot them in the head. What they did was they took people who were likely in the future, more likely in the future, to do those kind of things, and they shot them too, or put them out in the gulags, which is pretty much a death sentence anyway. So just think about that. You may be, it's not like a maybe thing. It's probably the biggest heartbreak of the Soviet Union, and there's enough there to go around, was the idea that so many of these Russian soldiers had endured so much. It really stopped Hitler pretty much, I won't say they did it by themselves, but in terms of hand-to-hand combat kind of thing, mostly by themselves. And you saw millions, 7, 8, 9 million Russian soldiers killed, and huge numbers taken prisoner, especially at the beginning of the war. These people fought for their country against the fact that whatever the Bolsheviks had done to them through collectivization, and every one of them had relatives probably had been taken out and shot, or knew people whose villages were destroyed by the Bolsheviks. But they had such patriotism that these soldiers would go out there and perform these miracles of bravery in Stalingrad and in outside Moscow and Leningrad, all of this. And I think the greatest tragedy of the Soviet Union is that the people who went out to the front and were the most patriotic, who fought hardest for the Rodina, for the country, would almost always, virtually every time, no matter how heroic they were, virtually every one of them that had been taken prisoners were either shot or sent to the camps, which again is pretty much a death sentence. And you may wonder why that is. Well, they've already shown that they're heroes. They're not people who surrendered. They're not people that just walked across enemy lines. Some of these guys are, seen by an entire platoon or an entire company of people. Took out a German machine gun nest by himself. They're war heroes. They put them into camps because they'd seen the West. They put them into these gulags because they had seen the West. And if they'd seen the West, then that was a real problem for the Soviets. What do you say about that? If you had relatives, when the Tsar has one of his pogroms, one of his anti-Jewish campaigns during the time before the communists, and he starts murdering Jews everywhere, and Jews who can afford to get out of the country are forced out of the country because the Russian government was murdering them, and they go to Paris or they go to Brussels, or they come to the United States or anything else. Just they chased them out of the country. Well, when the Bolsheviks came along, if you had relatives who were in any of these countries, you were probably going to go to a camp or get shot, because you were more likely at some point to commit a thought crime in the future. You might in the future be more likely to criticize Joseph Stalin or the 5-year plan or whatever. I always go into this kind of detail because we just don't appreciate it. It's like the reason I showed some of those videos on the Orlando firewall. Some of them are very graphic. They were by far not the most graphic things that I saw. I had to really tone them down, but people just don't see it. They just forget it because they don't come in contact with it. They don't appreciate it. But when you've had everybody who had any initiative just killed, you're gonna have some residue and some serious cultural echoes of that. And one of them was my friend genuinely saying, I'm really worried about you because you're criticizing the government. Back to Cheryl's point, I said, I'm not the slightest bit worried. I mean, being a somewhat public figure, which is, stretching the term public figure, but it does put you at a little bit more risk. I think there's probably no question about that. But I don't worry about this at all. And as far as the Muslims go, I don't worry about them too much either. In fact, never really enters my mind. So that is a function of how much and how pervasive this freedom has been in the country, that we all can do this without a moment's hesitation, And by the way, if the worst excesses of the U.S. government would be that progressives had weaponized the Internal Revenue Service and given especially tough scrutiny to conservative 501c3s, that is a disgrace, and it's got to stop. But that's a long way from getting shot in the back of the head. So anyway, it's a great question, and I think it's always a great question to start our little Independence Day video off on. And the idea is obviously that you can write questions like that. We can put up these pictures of Obama. We can criticize him. We can say this guy's an idiot, whatever, and we don't have to worry about it. It's not just nice. It's not just cool. It's an absolute, honest-to-God miracle. Maybe the greatest miracle in the history of the world. That's why we have to fight to conserve it, my friends. That's why we have to fight to conserve it. So our friend Max Wild is back. He's back twice, as a matter of fact. He's back to back. Good to see you again, Max. How are you? So the highest ranking question was, what does it say about our government when the time our nation was taxed the least was under King George III? This is it. They fought the revolution for a 1 cent tax on tea. I remember reading, I think, in The Innocents Abroad, or Following the Equator, I think it was Innocents Abroad, where Mark Twain was amazed that Italians were paying 10%, 12% of their total income in taxes to the government, when he said Americans wouldn't put up with a quarter of that. 3-4% of their income, Americans would have just rioted. The problem we have now, Max, is that we are so wealthy, all of us as a country, that they keep taking more and more money. And I'm not going to say we don't really miss it, but it doesn't impact us the way it would if we were short on things. If we were short on things and the government lost $10 billion, and that meant, we didn't eat for 3 days, then they wouldn't lose $10 billion because we'd run them out of office with a pitchfork, which is appropriate. But a combination of things really anesthetize us to this incredible tax rate. And I've just started running a business as a business, even though the business has been open for 3 years or so. I've really only finally had the help of people like Carla and her husband and all the rest of these fine people who've shown me what it's like to actually run a business. And it is a full-time job of one person to do nothing but comply with regulations and taxes, and every time you think you paid your tax, there's another one. There's just something else you didn't know about. $30 or $3,000 or whatever. It's just, what is this? This is the City of Los Angeles licensing fee. For what? For selling products in Los Angeles, but nobody comes to the store here. We don't have a store. Yeah, but that's okay. What can you do? Nothing. You can move to Texas, I guess. That's one thing. I just wish they would have I wish we could take one Pacific state. That's all I want. And I'll settle for Alaska ultimately. But if we could just take Washington or Oregon or California. I think even Idaho is so lovely, although Idaho's going pretty pink down in Boise, so it's just a constant fight. You have to go out and mow the grass. But yeah, Max, it says that we've got nothing like the resistance to being told what to do that our ancestors had, and it also means that we just pay this money because we feel it in things that we don't achieve or get, but we don't feel it in physical ways in terms of not getting enough food or not having shelter or heat or anything like that. The biggest reason they get away with taking as much money as they get away with, I think if I could change one law, this would be it. This would be it. I'd do this before I would repeal the 17th Amendment. It's payroll withholding. I would make it illegal. Because, as I've said before, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I've gone over this quite a bit. If you get paid $800 a week, let's say, your paycheck says $620, and that's what they've withheld from your check every time. At the end of the year, let's say they've taken 25-30% of your income. They've taken $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. At the end of the year, you get a $700 refund, and you feel great. Oh my God, I'm getting a refund. The government's giving me a check. Hooray! Now, I'm not saying that people don't know that they're working for $800 an hour and taking home $600. I'm not saying that they're not aware of it, but I'm saying that since they never touch the money, it's a different thing. It's academic. This is the hinge upon which these entire tax rates turn. The progressive tax rate, income tax rate, turns on this point. Them withholding the money is not the same thing as them giving you the money that you actually earned and then you having to give back what you pay in taxes. It's nothing like the same thing at all, not even close. So, I mean, think about that. If Americans every quarter had to write checks to the IRS, I do. I've had to start doing that because I own my own business. You get out the old checkbook, and every 3 months you have to write a 5-figure check to the U.S. government and the state of California. They're not 5 figures, but per quarter, you start thinking, why am I doing this? Honestly, seriously, there are many times when, when you just, I can't be the only business person in America to feel this way because I came to this party so late. But really, once you see this list of taxes and once a new one comes along, the inclination is just to say, you know what, screw this whole thing. You can have all the money you want to. Congratulations, IRS. You put me out of business. You've taken everything I've got, and now I have to pay you all this money, and that's fine. And I'll close the business because I can't afford to keep things going at a 50% tax rate. And now I'm going to go on welfare. So instead of me pumping money into the system, I'm going to take money out. I'm going to get all the benefits. I'm going to get an EBT card just like everybody else. I'm going to do all these things. It just is almost overwhelming sometimes to get past that. You know, the Bible talks about 10% and Romans and everybody else. 10%, one finger, right? I mean, that's really where you get the 10% from. One of these fingers, guess which one, goes to the government, and the other 9 you get to keep. And that has been considered since pretty much the dawn of writing and culture and history to be the maximum taxation rate, is a tenth, tithing. We're way past that. They take a whole hand now, and pretty soon they're going to leave you with 2 fingers. Bernie Sanders, who got millions and millions of votes, basically got millions of votes by saying he wants to cut off 9 of your fingers, and you get to keep 1. What gives them the right, Max? What gives you the right? What gives you the moral right? Well, we need it for the poor. You don't spend it on the poor, and you don't spend it on highways. Our highways are falling apart. You spend it on yourselves. You spend it on retirement programs. You spend it on buying votes and people driving, city commissioners in Detroit driving, Lincoln Navigators, 2 of them. This is where the tax money goes. It just goes to people who steal it legally. And as BB106 pointed out here in the comment section, it's not just that they spend the $2.5 billion who am I kidding? The $2.5 trillion that they take from us every year. The $2.5 trillion is 50% of our income, more or less, that they take from us. They can't run the government on that. They have to borrow another $1.5 trillion. They have to print it, basically, and charge it to the next generation. And every time they charge more money to the next generation, we have to spend more money of the money that we actually make to pay off this ever-growing interest on this ever-growing debt. I had a friend in Britain, a British girl who I met in Florida when I was in my 20s. And I just simply couldn't believe this was true, but since I've heard out, it certainly is true. She was a tax refugee in the 70s. I want to say maybe it might have been early 80s, but it wasn't much later than that. And she said that her father was quite wealthy in Britain, and she said he left because one year they were going to assess a tax of 103% on him. And I said, Jane, that's impossible. You can't take more than 100% of everything he makes. I'd leave way before they took 100%, but you can't take 103% from this guy. She said, no, that's what they did. They they figured out before Margaret Thatcher got there, they figured out what they wanted, and so they took everything he made that year, plus they took 3% out of his savings and assets. I'm not working for 3 cents on the dollar, Bernie. I said he was taking 90%. He's not. He's talking about taking 96, 94%, 93%, something like that. I'm not doing it. And I don't think anybody else will either. So what happens when you kill the golden geese, the 100 million of us that get up and work every day? They're going to find out if they keep this up. Moving on, we have another viewer here named Max Wild. And Max Wild asks us, here's another question. Do you think that the left forces conservatives to have so completely defend certain positions that they may not necessarily look critically at such positions? Take capitalism. Do we reflexively defend capitalism without analyzing it with a critical eye? Now, I know that was an example, an off the top of the head example, but we don't have to analyze capitalism. Capitalism analyzes itself. Capitalism, if unfettered, if left alone, capitalism is the single greatest source of intelligence that we've ever known. Because capitalism, and again, it's funny when you find the history of these things, you find out how even we, who I consider all of us watching this to be, conservative warriors, even we've been duped by these people and been told to what to say. The term capitalism apparently came from Karl Marx, who wanted to find a term for private property that he found, that that he could demonize. And in other words, in order to be successful in this system, you had to be, Mr. Moneybags from Monopoly. You had to be a fat guy with a top hat carrying around big sacks that had dollar signs on them. That's what you had to be in order to be a capitalist, and everybody else was just working for him and slaving away. Free markets, basically, just the free market, the idea that you've got something that I want and I've got something that you want, is the biggest single source of intelligence in the history of the world. And the reason I say that is because there are 300 million people just in this country who are making decisions they're very simple decisions, but when you think about the web of them, each individual person's web, they're fantastically complex. You make a decision about how much car you can afford and how much luxury you can afford, what you can afford to pay. You make decisions about what kind of auto insurance you have for the car. You make a decision about the house. Sometimes you overcommit yourself and you're on the rails. And sometimes if you're disciplined and you're 1 in 1,000, you save money and you use that wisely. But we all make decisions. And P.J. O'Rourke, who I wish I could meet him or at least interview him. After 12 years, you think I would have had a chance, because he has such an effect on me. One of the many, many, many brilliant things that he pointed out to me was about the stock market. And he said, well, first of all, he said something that most people just simply don't even think about, just never enters their head. And that is, during a financial meltdown, when everybody's selling their stocks, PJ pointed out something that's so obvious that I didn't see it. Namely, for every person that sells a stock, somebody's buying. Somebody's buying that stock. And the people that are buying the stock are the people that don't panic. If you've got a stock that's worth $100 and the market crashes and now the stock's worth $1 and you sell it at $1, then you've lost 99% of the value. But if the stock was worth $100 and it goes to $1 and you hang on to it, and then the stock goes back up to 80 or 90 or 100 or 150 in the next 15 or 20 years, you haven't lost anything. So that is an interesting insight. But basically, the point I was trying to make here is, P.J. O'Rourke said, if you think about the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, people trying to understand how all this trading works and all this other stuff, he said the way to think of that is this. Let's say you wanted to buy a 2016 Camaro, which are very nice, by the way. The 2012s were, 2010 went all the way up to 2015. They redesigned them in 2016. With some tweaks in between. So let's say you want to buy a 2016 Camaro. What P.J. O'Rourke said is the power of the free market to decide costs is very simple. He said, imagine that you had every single buyer who was interested in buying a 2016 Camaro and every single person who sold Camaros, and all of them were in the same room. He said you would find out the price of that car within 20 seconds probably. And that really clarified things for me, because what the market is doing is the market is basically saying what are people willing to pay. They don't want to pay anything. They'd rather pay $1 for the car, right? But the dealer has to make money. His car costs a certain amount of money. He has to make that back. He has to make enough profit to run the business and pay his employees. Plus, he has to make enough profit to presumably put some of it away. So he's going to figure out what that car costs, and the dealer now will have a point below which he cannot go. He simply cannot go. He will lose money on the deal. But he'd love to go way above that, because that's what the seller wants. He'd love to, make you buy a $30,000 car for $40,000. Hooray. So whatever the number is, let's just say it's $30,000. If you have all the buyers in one place and all the sellers in one place, you're going to get to $30,000 right away, because you are going to find out that I want to pay $30,000, and a dealer will have it for sale for $45,000. So you're out of your mind. And then you'll find somebody selling it for $36,000, and you'll find all these people that are selling it, and you'll get to $30,000, and you won't find anybody below $30,000, because $30,000 is the smallest amount that somebody can sell a car for and still survive. So it's not that hard. And once I realized what he was saying, I realized that, well, of course, that's how the stock market works. I just didn't have anybody explain it to me in such a concise way. All of the buyers and all of the sellers, through their representatives, are in one place, and you will get to an absolutely instantaneous view of what the value of whatever it is you're trying to sell. And the reason I bring this up is because you can pretend and you can legislate prices to be different than the Camaro example I gave, you can legislate, you can have a law that says that it is a right of people. Put another amendment in the Constitution. Say you have a constitutional right to a 2016 Camaro, and that your constitutional right says you can't pay more than $10,000 for the car. You can do that. You can also conceivably could write legislation that says that a 2000 Camaro cannot be sold for less than $50,000. So let's just say you did that. Price is 30, and one law says no, you can't pay more than $10,000. That's the law, or you must charge more than $50,000. That's the law. What happens when you start fooling around like this? Well, if you say that the car has to be sold for $10,000 or less, it's my right as an American, and the car costs $24 to build, then they're not going to make any more 2016 Camaros. They just simply will not make them. They can't. It's not worth the raw materials. They simply cannot do it. So the car goes away, and all the wealth goes away, and all the fun goes away, and all that stuff goes away. So if you artificially set a price too low, then the commodity or the goods in question or the services will dry up because it's not worth doing. Conversely, if you set the price so high, you might sell 7 2016 Camaros at half again more, or twice what they're actually worth, or maybe you sell more than that. But you wouldn't sell as many as you could. And the one thing that's always fascinated me, it's really fascinated me, and I know there are people that are experts in this, but it's the kind of thing that you never really think about until you do, and then when you do, it's like, holy cow. And that is that every product in the world, including BillWhittle.com memberships, including the cameras that we're talking about now, the Apple computers that we're working, everything, including people's wages, everything has a sweet spot. And the sweet spot is the point at which the graph, your cost is in the vertical, the higher you go, the more it costs. And then to the right, the more you sell. You're going to sell lots and lots of things if they're very cheap. You're going to sell very, very few things if they're very expensive. And every single product has arrived at the sweet spot where if you raised the price on a pair of Nikes, you would make more money per pair, but you wouldn't sell as many pairs. So if you raise the price of Nikes, that will reduce your total income. Likewise, if you lower the price on Nikes, you'll sell more of them, but you won't make as much per box of shoes, and that will lower the income. And all of these products find that magical sweet spot where they have figured out just through the market that this is the way to maximize our income. If we charge more than this, we'll sell fewer. We'll make more money, but we'll sell fewer, which means net loss. If we charge less than this, we'll sell more, but we'll get less per item, which means net loss. Right at the sweet spot. And how they find that out is absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely incredible. It finds itself. So I know there's a lot on capitalism there, Max, when you're really just asking us about defending positions that we may not necessarily look critically at. The only thing I have to say about that is I have found myself occasionally reflexively defending things that I didn't feel like I should be defending, simply because the left is using it as a bludgeon to get more of our money and power and all the rest of it. One example I remember pretty well was from a Trifecta show we did. And the show was about, the individual episode was about a kid who was I think he was on a college track team, might have been a high school track team. And he is running the race, and some kid falls down, and this guy stops and goes back and helps the kid up, and they cross the finish line together. This kid was winning and would have won the race. It was like way out in front. So he stops, he goes back, he picks up the kid, from a different school, who's hurt himself, and arm around each other, off they go, and they cross the finish line dead last. And a lot of conservatives came out against that. They came out pretty violently against it in our comment section. This kid's an idiot. He doesn't owe these people anything. Self-interest, enlightened self-interest is good for everybody. And all the rest of this Ayn Rand stuff and all the rest of this invisible hand stuff and all this stuff makes sense. It does. It absolutely does. But when you demonize, when you've been using help thy neighbor as thyself to take everything from you, so to the point where acts of actual charity and virtue are suspect, then you got to stop and you got to roll down the windows. What that guy did was a tremendously honorable thing and a good thing and a noble thing. The difference is very simple, and the difference is he decided that he wanted to sacrifice his own winning medal, and on his own volition, without coercion, he made a moral decision that he would rather help this person than come in first place. And that is fundamentally different. It's diametrically opposed to the idea that somebody is forcing him to go back and help that guy, forcing him to give up the win and go back and help the guy. But we get so defensive. And rightfully so. We're defensive all the time because we're under attack all the time. We're trying to conserve this beautiful, wonderful thing on Independence Day. We're trying to conserve this freedom thing. And I thought about this getting dressed today. It's like, hey, we're going to have Independence Day coming up. We talk about freedom. It's like kids don't understand. They think you're nuts when you talk about freedom. And they think you're nuts in the same way if you went around talking about how all of the electricity was going to fail. They would say, the electricity can't fail. What do you mean you can't be free? Of course you're free. We're always going to be free. We don't need to defend freedom. We don't need to fight for it. We certainly don't need to work for it. That's all we've ever known. It's all our parents have ever known, and it's all their parents have ever known. You won't know it until it's taken away, and then it'll be too late. So, yes, I do know what you mean, Max. Sometimes we do get a little backed into a corner, and I've seen it. I've seen, oh my God, they're sneaking around again. Look at this. It's like some kind of infestation. We better get we need to get the pest control people in here. There's all kinds of things moving around in the background on the shot. I'm seeing all kinds of, she's looking at me like like I'm serious. It was a joke. It was a joke. I saw you go through the frame, and I said we need to get some pest control in here. Here she's coming.
This is the best boss ever. I know you all love him, but I love him more. Aren't you
sweet? That raise is not going to happen, by the way. Try though you may. That was a nice thing to say. Thank you. There we go. I don't remember what I was talking about anymore, but it had to do with the whole thing. Look, there she is. All right, let's move on here. Steve Darrow has a question that was highly ranked. He said, what type of new content do you have planned specifically targeted to the Utes that will begin to reverse the progressive indoctrination that downplays the importance of founding principles when most people don't even know what these founding principles are? Superb question, Steve. And I've virtually all of the live speeches I do cover this whole messaging thing. The way that you get young people, and this is the horrible blunder that we make all the time. I'll just tell you what I've said in a bunch of speeches, and I'm just going to assume you haven't heard this before. I'll go and speak to a group of Tea Party people or Republican Women's Club of somebody or else or whatever. And I will say to them, listen, I think we're making a dreadful mistake, and I know why we're making it, and I understand why we're making it, but we can't keep making it. What's the mistake? The mistake is that Republicans dress everything in red, white, and blue bunting, and they have the Constitution silkscreened onto panels, and everything is parchment and quills. And we have the Gadsden flag, and we have pictures of guys in ruffled shirts with waistcoats and tri-corner hats. And when you say this, people just want to go, what's the matter with you? It's like, nothing's the matter with me, guys. I'm a day walker, right? I'm a vampire that slays other vampires. I live in their world, and I see what they're good at. And our mistake is we are so enamored with the past. We're so enamored with the foundational principles of the country. They get eroded every day. That's why we are conservatives. We're trying to conserve this most beautiful thing ever created, this freedom. We're trying to conserve it. And so naturally we look backwards because we can measure how much we've lost. We can measure where we're going by how much we've lost. So naturally we look back towards the Founding Fathers as a time of real purity and a time of genuine on-earth ideal type of government, about as ideal as it can possibly be. And that is a big mistake. Because if you go to young people who, not that they don't know about this stuff, they have specifically been excluded from knowing about this stuff. They have not learned anything about American history. They know nothing about civics. They know nothing about how the government works. And now they're not even being taught cursive handwriting, which I thought was an odd thing to kind of insist on. And then it just suddenly occurred to me, and it's probably occurred to 50 million other Americans too. If they don't teach kids cursive, if they can't read cursive handwriting, presumably because we're all using devices from now on, if kids can't read cursive handwriting, then they can't read the Constitution. They can't read the Declaration, and they can't read the Bill of Rights. Just think about that. It's over time, it's almost like teaching the American people a new language. And the old language that all of this freedom was written in is just like Latin. It just dies away. Or Esperanto. So when we talk about the youth, Steve, we have to, I can express this fairly concisely for a change. Our messages need to look like Apple ads. We the people should be in black Helvetica on a white background down low in a corner. And we have to convince young people that the future is in front of them, that of course the future is in front of them, that the values that we hold are not 250 years old, appropriate to men with bad teeth, 60 years old and wearing powdered wigs, but rather that all of these principles are in fact ahead of us, and we need to work towards them. It's so hard for us because we love the bunting, and we love the George Washington stuff. We love the flags and the eagles and all that other stuff, but I think it's absolutely a mistake. And every time I see a conservative flyer or mailing for like a Republican politician or something, so many times I see it's all red, white, and blue, and stars and waving flags and eagles and a type font that's kind of like an old text, and it's gold on dark red, and it's absolutely unreadable, and it looks like it's done by old amateurs. And I think these ideas deserve better than that. I think these principles deserve to be updated in terms of how they're delivered. I think they need to be immutable in terms of what they say. I wouldn't change a comma, not one. But I would present it in such a way that it was appealing to read for modern viewers. I put it in black Helvetica against white, and I would make it clean and cool and simple. And I think that's one of the many mistakes we make, and I could go into more of them, but I will say one more thing, Steve, and that is this. You can lecture young people all you want to about free markets and all the rest of it stuff, and you can complain about them being socialists, and you can talk about how you tell young millennials about socialism, and they just don't care. They roll their eyes. Well, of course we should be socialists. Why not? Capitalism has made so much wealth for them that they don't know what they're doing. They just don't have a clue. So it sounds like it's friendly, and all the other kids are saying it, so let's all be socialists. And you can go at that and try and, and go at it with an axe. But the way I think is the most effective way to do it is this. You have to make them see that the actions, not the actions that you want them to take, but the actions that they've taken their entire lives are conservative actions. The thing I use all the time, I'm just beating it to death, and I'll keep flogging it to death. The idea that these kids call themselves socialists and they have cell phones, and they will not take their cell phones and sell them and distribute the money to poor people, from each according to their ability to each according to his need. Whenever I go and speak in public and I say they're all about wealth redistribution so long as it's somebody else's wealth being redistributed to them, but when it's their wealth being redistributed to somebody else, then all of a sudden they're William F. Buckley. Gets a huge cheer because it's exactly right. It's exactly true. And you can point out to people who have, people who are complaining about how this guy's this rich fat cat 1%er has 7 houses. That's disgusting. It's disgraceful. How can you live in a world where people have 7 houses and other people are starving in the streets? First of all, nobody's starving in the streets of America. There are some mentally ill people in the streets of America, and there's some people who have real employment problems on the streets of America, but nobody's starving on the streets of America. But basically, they'll say, how can you justify a system where somebody has 7 houses and other people don't have any? And I'll simply say to this guy, hey, dude, do me a favor, get out your iPhone and tell me how many songs you have. Why do you want to know? I'm just curious. Just tell me how many songs you got on your iPhone. I don't know, 750? 750 songs, really? They cost about $1 each, round numbers to download, right? That's $750. Do you need 750 songs? Do you ever listen to them all at the same time? A lot of people out there don't have any music at all. In fact, a lot of people out there aren't even eating because, they don't have roofs over their head. The $750 that you spend on music, You could have just gotten 50 songs and put $700 into people's lives and fixed their homelessness. Why didn't you do it? What kind of a disgusting moral creature has 750 songs? I'll bet you there are songs on your iPhone that you haven't listened to in years. And I bet you keep buying new ones all the time with money that you could be spending on social programs. And then they realize, okay. And if they don't realize it, I'll realize it for them. I'll say, you are making the exact same decisions as a person who has 7 houses is making. You're just making it on a smaller scale. You're spending your money on what you want for yourself. And the big close to this is, and I don't want to live in a world where some Republican jerk who you've never met in your life can come forward and tell you how many songs you should have on your iPhone. It's none of my business what you do with your money. And the idea that they're evil and you're not doesn't wash. You could have donated that $700. You could have donated $50 or whatever. You haven't done it. You spend it on yourself. You spend it on video games. Your Xbox is a toy that could feed an entire family in Africa for a year for the price of that toy, and you will not sell that toy and send that money to Africa because you want it for yourself. And so does the guy who has 7 houses. And that guy worked his tail off. Your money comes from your dad who worked his tail off. You haven't done anything. And then they're trapped, and then they realize that everything they've done is hypocritical compared to what they think their principles are, and they don't know what their principles are because they've been told what their principles are by a bunch of absolutely pathetic failures in college who simply cannot accomplish anything, and so they're going to take it out on the rest of the world. We got 3 to go because we have to move fairly quickly. I love this question. Victor Kook, K-U-C, Cook. Hi, Victor. I can get that part right anyway. He has a great question. He says a number of people, I'm assuming most of these are left-wingers. He says a number of people, including Neil deGrasse Tyson, are proposing a virtual country called Rationalia. Do you think such a place would have more or less freedom than the U.S.? Back in 2005 or 6 or 7, somewhere in there, I wanted to have an online community called Ejectia. I didn't come up with the name, but it was all the eject regulars. There may be some of them here still watching. And it was going to be just a website, and the website would allow you to have, like, there'd be a library where people could contribute, be like a wiki article but on useful things. Here's how you clean a shotgun. Here's how you prepare, wild turkey. Here are roots that you can eat out in the woods. Here's how you wire an electrical box in your house. All this stuff. And then, we'd have all these interactions in chat rooms and all this other jazz, and I had this beautiful city rendered up on the top of mountains up in the clouds, and I loved it. It looked great. It was a fun idea. The idea of a virtual country is not ridiculous, but the idea of a virtual country called Rationalia, headed by people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, is fully hysterical. It's absolutely hysterical. Again, it comes back to this Island 120 idea. Neil deGrasse Tyson is as much of a scientist as Bill Nye is, which is to say, not much. Tyson, had all kinds of problems with his grades and claimed racism because he didn't pass tests and stuff. And of all the idiotic things that Neil deGrasse Tyson has said not too long ago, he basically said, if you're in an airplane and you lose your engine, you've got a glider. But if you're in a helicopter and you lose the airplane, you've got a brick. So says the brightest man in the history of, certainly on the earth today in America. Neil deGrasse Tyson is so stupid he doesn't have any idea about autorotation. He doesn't, which is fine. It's okay. You don't have to know everything about everything. But to confidently state that that this is the case is a sign of his stupidity. And that's really the word for it. And I see this all the time. I see it all the time. I see it in all of these guys like Jimmy Kimmel, and Kimmel's not, actually I like Jimmy Kimmel, Bill Maher and all these other people. They're just so sure how smart they are. And they're trying to reach that 120 IQ island where everybody talks the same and thinks the same. And people who are with IQs of 130, 140, 150, 160, they look back on 120, they go, you can't actually believe that nonsense, do you? Yes, you do. Guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson are a perfect example of a B student or a C student who claims to be the smartest guy in the room and isn't. He's not even close. But he thinks he is. And other people think he is too, because he's smarter than the other people are. And he's got the same views as they do. So they think, well, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I mean, he's got to be a brilliant guy. He's obviously one of the great scientists of all time. He's not. He's just a guy on TV, just like me. And I have heard Neil deGrasse Tyson speak about a number of things, and I'm quite sure I'm better educated than Neil deGrasse Tyson is, and I'm quite sure that I am more capable of reasonable argument than Neil deGrasse Tyson is. I may know more astronomy than Neil deGrasse Tyson does. I'm not sure about that, but I wouldn't be surprised. I certainly have a better picture of situational awareness of things than Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he's fawned over. Sagan had real chops. Sagan had real, because deGrasse Tyson wants to be Carl Sagan. Sagan had actual breakout brilliant mind. I mean, Sagan did an awful lot of work with greenhouse work on Venus, and then he was the guy who said, hey, well, since there's a sandstorm on Mars, why don't we point the Mariner 9 to Phobos and Deimos? And Sagan came up with some genuinely brilliant things. And Sagan talked about the dragons of Eden, and he talked about how our fear of reptiles and lizards is probably a genetic component that goes back to the days when mammals were being hunted nocturnally by reptiles, and broke his brain, and other, I think it was Dragons of Eden, where he basically said, look, humans basically have three brains, and one is evolved on top of the other. There's the R complex, the reptile brain, which was panic and fear and violence and aggression. And on top of that is the limbic system, which deals with emotions like love and jealousy and envy and nurturing and all that stuff. And on top of that, humans have a cerebral cortex, which gives us rationality. But I've never heard anything like Tyson coming up with anything like that at all. Nothing even in the same ballpark. And when you got a bunch of people calling a place Rationalia, I'd be perfectly willing to bet you that if you were to go in there and have discussions about things with the citizens of Rationalia, and you were able to put up a good argument, I'm quite convinced they wouldn't change their minds. Seriously, folks, the breakout condition for really becoming wise, which I think is intelligence plus humanity. I think wisdom is intelligence plus experience. But the breakout, in order to get to the other side where wisdom is, get past intelligence and get to wisdom, and is the idea is when you finally realize that you're not as smart as you think you are. When you realize that there are there's a lot more things you don't know than you do know. I had this realization very early in this career anyway. When I first started doing public speaking, it was in 2009. I mean, I'd already had a lot of respect for people, but I remember once I went into this little tiny room in the middle of nowhere, and like 7 people there, and they're kind of simple country people, and I just reflexively wanted to go into Hollywood douchebag mode. It's like, what am I doing here? There's none of these people, there's not very many of them, and and they're all a bunch of hayseeds and hicks and rubes and stuff. And I didn't. Nobody had to thrash me. I thrashed myself. I just really stopped and said, okay, Bill, come on now. You just seriously, these people are here to see you. So number one, they're entitled to your respect, and secondly, and this was the moment. Secondly, every single person, some of them were in coveralls, farm coveralls. Every single one of those people knows 100 things, if not 1,000 things that you don't know, and they know hundreds of things better than you know them. They know how to do things that you don't know how to do at all, and they have qualities which you do not have, would like to have, and never will have, because you don't have the discipline and you don't have the work ethic or whatever. There's every single one of them is a treasure. Every single one of them has experience and expertise in areas where they are world qualified. Maybe it's world qualified as a dairy farmer, but there's nobody in Washington knows more about dairy farmer than this guy. Nobody. They certainly don't know more about dairy farming in the Food and Drug Administration offices in Washington, D.C. And once you realize that everybody is possessed of incredible wisdom and experience and knowledge about any number of things that you don't know about, you get over your intellectual elitism pretty quickly. And once you get over the elitism, then you can look at things with an open mind. You can actually just get past this whole kind of wanting to seem like everybody else, wanting to seem like all the other smart people, believe all the same things. because it doesn't have to be popular if it's true. One person with experimental evidence can blow an entire theory away, and that's what's great about reason. But I'd be willing to bet you, just from the feel of it, because I've been there before too, I think a bunch of people getting themselves together and patting themselves on the back and saying that we're the rational people, I'd be very concerned about those people, because they sound like people that are so sure of their own intellectual superiority that they don't have anything to learn from this point forward, and that is in fact the antithesis of ration and genuine intelligence. I had a sentence I liked a lot, I think, if I remember correctly. I said, intellectualism is intelligence that's been left in the back of the fridge for 6 months. And I think that's really it. It's the remnant, it's the husk of what had one time been clever, maybe even brilliant thinking, reduced to dogma and repetition and peer pressure and all the rest, to the point where it's now essentially useless. You're just parroting things, you're aping them. So anyway, Dave Olson, who, by the way, I tried to get confirmation on this, because Dave had just posted a little headline on the webpage, and I thought, this is wonderful. Did you come up with this? Is this yours? And I didn't hear back from him in time, but just wanted to say for the public record, gratefully, that it was Dave Olson who came up with that phrase we used for the last right angle. He was the one who came up with "Cool Britannia," and I think it's the most clever thing I'd seen about the whole Brexit thing. As a matter of fact, it's tempting to want to rename this firewall "Cool Britannia" because it's called Brexit and the 4th of July, and we've learned the hard way that the title of the video has an awful lot to do with the number of people that watch it. And I love these evocative titles. I would have loved to call it "Cool Britannia," and I still may, because it's such a great phrase. But I didn't know it until I went with it before I heard back from him. It turns out he did come up with it. So Dave, thank you again for that. It's a great little expression. Yes, the question is, what does freedom mean anymore? Is it the freedom to steal terms like "Cool Britannia"? No, joking. We supposedly have freedom of speech, but not if you say something that offends someone. We supposedly have freedom of religion, but not if your bakery chooses not to participate in your wedding. We supposedly have the right to be secure in our persons, papers, and homes from unreasonable searches and seizures, but the horse has long since left that barn. Are we really free anymore? It's a great question. Well, we are and we aren't. We are more free than the communists, and we were less free than we used to be. Cheryl told me, just stuck her head in the door. Cheryl, we had an entire little homage to you earlier when we read your question first, so be sure to go back there and watch it on YouTube again and again and again and again and again. And that's really what it is, right? It's like it is a spectrum, a freedom spectrum. You have a case of real freedom, which is the freedom that the Founding Fathers handed down to us. You have utter tyranny, where no one can do anything. And in between these two things, you have where we are. Do we still have freedom of speech? Yes, we do. And the fact that it offends people is just too bad for them. In the real world, they can be as offended as they want to, and it doesn't have any effect. It's only on college campuses where they've got so much extortion leverage over the well, it's not extortion leverage over the university staff. The university staff agrees to things like safe spaces and eliminating conservatives from campus and restricting free speech. It's not because they've been pushed into it. It's because the faculty believes that themselves. But you pay to go to a university, and it's private property in most cases. And if it's state property, you get the idea, right? It's a little universe where they can limit free speech, but it has not affected my ability to speak freely, or yours either, politically. And let's not forget, and we talk about things like censorship and free speech, used to get this all the time back at Eject. When I'd run into somebody particularly nasty in the comment section, I'd give them a lot of rope. I really would. I don't give anybody nearly that much rope anymore, because they just come in and hijack the comment section on a particular thread. But in any event, if somebody got really, really nasty and offensive, I would block them. And they would say, "You're depriving me of my right to free speech." I said, on the contrary, I am not. You have the right to say whatever you want to. What I'm depriving you of is I am depriving you of the audience that I have earned. I'm depriving you of the audience of eyeballs that I have earned. You can say whatever you want to someplace else. I'm not stopping you from speaking. I'm stopping you from speaking on my private property, which is my website. I have that right. If a protester wants to stand in a public area and talk about, scream about Greenpeace or scream about Planned Parenthood, whatever they want to do, they have a right to do that. They don't have a right to do it in my living room. And I don't have to listen to them in my living room. And you can make the case that if I have to listen to them every day outside on my street, then they have in fact invaded my house. So censorship and stuff like that really only applies to, and intimidation and, all of the shaming and all the rest of it, only really applies to, does the censoring body have the coercive power of state violence behind them? Can they, if you call the cops, whose side are the cops going to be on? So we're certainly still have free speech. No one has been legally prevented from speaking because it offended people. Now, on the second point, we are much worse off. This business of forcing them to, provide services for people that they don't particularly care for, and then fining them six-figure fines if they didn't, is repugnant, especially when it's a religious principle. I mean, this whole thing with the bakery and stuff is just, it's catastrophic. If we had a court and a Congress, if we'd had a Congress, we would have, and we do, by the way, and we do, right? We do have a Congress. It's not like if we had a Republican majority someday, we have a Republican majority someday. We have one right now. And if we did, we would simply throw this nonsense out. And here's how you can throw this nonsense out, by the way, and most people do not realize this, but it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. All the powers that the Congress and these charlatans in the House and the Senate have stolen, with things like the Commerce Clause, that's one thing. But there is a profound power that they not only have not stolen, but they haven't used, and that is the power for Congress to simply dismiss any court in the country, including the Supreme Court. Now you're done. What? Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? Now you're done. What do you mean we're done? You're dissolved. We're going to replace you. We understand that we need judges in that area, but this nonsense of yours has just gone on far enough. You're dissolved. Problem solved. The founders never envisioned the Supreme Court as being able to overturn the will of the people. The founders never envisioned the Supreme Court as ruling on whether a law was constitutional. If the law was voted on by members of Congress and voted on and fairly tallied the votes, then the law was legal and constitutional by definition. It came from the House of Representatives, approved by the Senate. It's law. The court doesn't have a right to say that's not law. If you want to change what the law is doing, if you don't like segregation, for example, it's not the court's job, it's Congress's job to change. That's why you rotate the Congress every 2 years, at least the House every 2 years. And you rotate the Senate every 6 because some things you want quick rotation on in order to facilitate change, and sometimes you want slow rotation because sometimes it's good to resist change. It's a nice balance. But this whole thing with them striking down laws is ridiculous. Not only does Congress have the power to dismiss one of these circuit courts, and I'm quite sure the Supreme Court as well. What's interesting about the Supreme Court is everybody assumes, 9 justices and a chief justice. Doesn't say 9 justices anywhere in the Constitution. Doesn't specify how many judges or justices there are on the Supreme Court. It simply specifies that there must be one Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. So if Robertson goes to work, as far as the Constitution is concerned, by himself, he's good to go. Roosevelt, FDR, found himself being constrained in his tyrannical desire to rewrite society in his own image in the 30s, and the court basically said none of this stuff is constitutional. You can't pass any of this New Deal stuff. And what Roosevelt said was, Roosevelt understood the Constitution to this degree, understood it well enough to destroy it in many places. Roosevelt basically said, look, okay, so what is it? What's the vote? 6-3 against me? Okay, fine. So there's 9 justices, and I'll appoint another 6. I'll appoint 6 more justices to the Supreme Court, and then the vote will be 9-12 in my favor. I'll just pack the court with as many as many liberals as I want to. And by the way, boy, that's a tough name. RQ Tech 86 over there said he disagrees with me. He says if a law is passed that says the First Amendment is repealed, it's not constitutional. You're absolutely right. I was wrong about that. I think you can say that any law that's passed by Congress that is not in violation of natural law, the Bill of Rights, they can do. But I've said 100 times in public that you could have somebody repeal the First Amendment, or proposed bill repealing the First Amendment could be ratified by all of the states and could be voted on by the House, and they could get 435 votes to nothing, and the Senate could vote for it 100 to nothing, and the president could sign it into law, and it wouldn't matter because it's not law. It's a natural right, and you can't have it taken away from you. You can just have a government that tries to. So let me just correct myself there. I was really talking about a little more mundane kind of things, but I like being pointed out when I'm wrong, and I was wrong about that. But in any event, because it doesn't happen very often, I think the last time was 1968, somewhere in there. This business about the court is the founders would have been mortified. And then the right to be secure in our persons, papers, and homes from unreasonable searches and seizures. Look, papers, persons, and homes. People say papers. Well, your papers are secure. It's just your emails that aren't secure. This is the same ridiculous, absurd argument that these morons try to apply to the Second Amendment, saying, well, that only applies to single-shot flintlock muskets. No, it doesn't say the right of the people to bear muskets shall not be infringed. It says to bear arms. And the reason they said arms was because they figured that if this republic lasts for a while, there's going to be more sophisticated weapons, and those are what you can have. When people say, well, your papers are secure, but your email's not, my emails are my papers. My emails are my private correspondence. They're protected. The same people, so there are people, I'm not the first person to come up with this, I sure wish I wasn't the last, but you will see people on Bill Maher's show, let's say, who are saying that the First Amendment only applies to flintlock muskets. And they're telling people this on television, broadcast around the world by geostationary satellites, to which obviously the response is, well, if the Second Amendment only applies to muskets, then the First Amendment only applies to pen and parchment, or as loud as your voice can carry if you ring a bell in the center of a town hall. Your First Amendment doesn't extend to what you say on TV. It's the founders never envisioned TV or the internet. You don't have a First Amendment on the internet or television. You have a First Amendment to write whatever you want to, and handwrite it, by the way. You don't get to print it. But if you do, you get to print it on a Franklin kind of printer. You can't just run off a million of them, because the founders never could have foreseen this internet revolution or this satellite revolution, television revolution, or whatever. That's true. They could not have foreseen it. But they did foresee the immortal qualities of the fact that your right to free speech is inviolate regardless of what the medium is. It doesn't matter. You have a right to free speech. You have a right to protect yourself. It doesn't matter what the weapon is. It doesn't matter. It's not protecting the weapon. It's protecting the right. You have a right to not be searched in your papers or your private correspondence. They can call it papers. They can call it email. They can call it end mail for neutrino mail. It doesn't matter. It's your communications, and they don't have a right to dig into them. And everybody knows what this means. So anyway, yeah, Dave, the bad news is we're not as free as we used to be. The good news is we're still way, way, way past the center mark towards freedom, and that's why people like us run around with our hair on fire. It's not that things are as horrible now as they could be. We just don't like the trend lines because we know where they lead. And our last question for the night before I get back to editing and all the rest of this stuff is from Matthew Lloyd. And Matthew Lloyd says, Bill, are shootings like Orlando similarly to the number of traffic deaths every year just the price we have to be willing to pay in order to live in a free society where people can buy guns and cars? When I copied that question, I didn't quite read it in full. I just knew I liked it. And I didn't realize the elegance of how that particular question is answered. Because my answer to that question is yes, and I've had this thought many times, and this is the kind of thing where you want to get some mileage out of your liberals, literally make their heads explode. You say to them, well, what are you going to do about mass shootings? You say, well, look, I'm in favor of doing whatever can be done to prevent mass shootings in terms of legality and constitutionality, but ultimately, it's the price we pay for being free. What? And then they lose their minds. No, England is free, and England doesn't have these mass shootings. England has a history of, the English people have a history of submission to terror inflicted by the ruling class. The English people have a history of taking a knee to lords and kings, dukes, and all the rest of it. And if a duke happened to show up in an ATM line in most of Britain, at least up until 20 years ago, and said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Do you mind if I go to the front of the line? I'm His Lordship Duke of Earl." "Oh, by all means, Your Lordship." Twain wrote an essay saying the British love to take a knee. It's true. So Scandinavians are free. They don't have gun shootings. Scandinavians are free because Americans pay for their defense. One of the reasons we're so good at defense is because we're used to handling guns. We're the only good guys in the world that's good at this. I really think that's true. Maybe not the only good guys in history, but we are certainly here's how I want to put it. We are the best people in history to be good at wielding applied violence, by far. We are by far the most morally advanced, morally restrained, morally decent people to ever have the kind of national and international power that this country has. There's no question about it. So I would like to say on some level, this is the price you pay. And see, these people, then they just lose their minds. But you can actually, if you want to go visit Rationalia, right? I'm sure nobody in Rationalia would make this argument, but if you really wanted to go to Rationalia and argue with Neil deGrasse Tyson about these gun deaths, you would say, look, forget about the victims for a minute. Let's just talk about the shooters. Because if we're talking about society, then we're talking about what's the broken part of society. What part of this gigantic machine with 320 million moving parts, which part has gone wrong? The victims are not at fault. There's nothing you can do about the victims. The victims are standing in mall. They're standing in line at college. The victims are completely innocent of this act. So let's just look at the number of shooters. And what is that number? Is it 1 a year, 2 a year, 5 in terms of these mass shootings? So then you say, let's say it's 3. Let's say there are 3 mass shooters a year who just snap and take guns and start going off. Well, Rationalia, what is the failure rate? If that's a catastrophic failure, what's the American failure rate? How catastrophic is it? Well, we can do simple math here, not complex math, but simple math we can do. If we had 300 million Americans and 10% of them failed, we'd have 30 million shooters a year. If 1% of them failed, we'd have 3 million shooters a year. If 1/10 of 1% failed, we'd have 300,000 shooters a year. If 1% of 1% failed, we'd have 30,000 shooters a year. If 10% of that number failed, we'd have 300 shooters a year, and if 10% of that number failed, we'd have 30 shooters a year, and if 10% of that number failed, we'd have 3. So what is that in terms of like quality control? Is that 7 sigma, 6 sigma? 6 sigma, is as I understand it, is a manufacturing term that says that when you achieve a certain level of manufacturing quality control, your products will come out with a very high percentage of them perfect. The number of bad iPhones made is probably pretty small. And I know that's got something to do with 6 sigma. Some engineers will bail me out a little bit, but I think 6 sigma is a standard of quality and a standard of reproducible, reliable manufacturing that says that this is it's a certification that you can get. If you can get to 6 sigma refers to 6 standard deviations. If you can get to 6 standard deviations, 3 standard deviations from the IQ norm puts you probably at 150 IQ, maybe higher. If you can get to 6 standard deviations, you've got a product that is essentially invincible. 3 failures out of 300 million units is 1 failure per 100 million. 1 per 100 million. 1 per everybody in France and Britain and probably Germany. 1 per year. This is not an epidemic. This is not an epidemic. It's an attention getter. And one of the reasons it gets so much attention is because, and this is the main thing, Matthew, this is the main thing. The reason the mass shooters get the hysteria from the left that they get is because this is something that could happen to them. That's why. That's why the progressives get hysterical about mass shootings. It's because it could happen to them. It could happen to them in a mall, could happen to them in an airport. The fact that during the time that the 2 weeks that we were talking about the Orlando shooting, 2 to 3 weeks, that number of people were gunned down just in Chicago doesn't enter the radar. You know why? Because the murder rate of America is determined by huge numbers of people who are in very violent neighborhoods who kill each other. It's if you take the gang-related, just take the gang-related killings, not just inter-gang, but the killing committed by gang members out of the American murder rate, you'd be amazed. The murder rate for white suburban Americans is as low or lower than it is for Brits or Australians or Swedes or anybody else. We have these incredibly violent, fairly localized violence pits, and we allow them to continue because they're run by progressives. The Democrats have run every one of these cities for a century or half a century, and they allow it to continue because they don't care. These progressives don't care if black people are murdering each other by the scores every week, or if 7 or 8 black kids were shot over a weekend. Black Lives Matter doesn't care about that either. It's background noise to them. It's not background noise to me. But it's background noise to them. And it doesn't bother them because they know, hey, look, you don't want to get shot, don't go drive through South Central. It's actually pretty good advice. The reason they can't not get any kind of a sense of rationality about these mass shootings is because they occur in colleges, they occur in movie theaters, they occur in places where liberals are. And that's why they're so terrified. And the point I actually was leading into making was simply this. They are, in fact, the only place in society where you have a chance of being violently murdered if you're a white middle-class progressive. They are the only place where you have a chance of being actually killed by somebody. And again, what's the chance? A chance 1 in 100 million that one guy's going to go off? That's why they're so scared of it. That's why they're so terrified of it, because it could happen to them, you see. Now, the corollary to this, I talked about this last week, and I want to run with this theme, is that the reason that they are so opposed to, why they're so in favor of gun control and not in favor of crime control, is multifaceted, but it comes down to 3 main things. First of all, being in favor of gun control allows them to signal their virtue to their peers and show the rest of us Neanderthals how much better they are than we are. That's number 1. Number 2, they believe in gun control because they have essentially the same irrational mindset as any other group of primitive people. The gun becomes the fetish. It becomes a sacrificial object. So basically, if we throw a virgin into the volcano, then the volcano won't erupt for a year. And if we ban the guns, then the shootings will stop. It's easier to ban guns than it is to ban murder and insanity. And conservatives have the ability to say murder and insanity are defects in the human manufacturing process, and they're defects in the human maintenance process. And despite the fact that we're at 6 sigma or 7 or 8 or whatever, defects happen because that's the world. And some people just turn out defective, and that's it. That's the price we can pay. And the best we can do is to make sure that the other gears and cogs close to these failing parts are as resilient as possible, ammo them up. But that's not what they want to hear. It's not what they can bear to hear. And the main reason that progressives are so against gun control, are so in favor of gun control, is because it's intolerable to them that other people could defend themselves when they know that they can't. They are emotionally and physically and intellectually incapable of defending themselves. There's one video that we did that great piece on the AR-15 about that guy Gersh Kuntzman, who talked about how traumatic it was to fire an AR-15. Then I put in some shots of a 7-year-old girl firing and having a great time. But there's another video going around out there. If you've seen it, I don't know. It's another guy shooting an AR-15, and there's a range guy right behind him with the earring protection on. And this guy's in a red T-shirt. He's a little bit doughy, little flabby, and he's got this AR-15. He fires one round, and he holds it out in front of him, and he literally It's hilarious and appalling. If I'm too afraid to defend myself, then I can't allow you to defend yourself, because number one, that'll give you a better chance to survive than me, and number two, it points out how cowardly I am. Best to leave that to the police. Best to leave it to the police, because you're not willing to do anything about it. But the police doesn't prevent crimes. The police draws chalk outlines, and they go looking for who did it. And for the people that are willing to say, I'm going to spend a little time and effort and money to see if I can reduce my chances of being a chalk outline, they're unwilling to do it. They're emotionally incapable of it. And since they're emotionally incapable of it, you will be too. Dun, 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 dun. I think that'll do it. It was Carla's idea to do a 4th of July Independence Day Stratosphere Lounge, and it was a darn good idea. We'll post it up on Facebook on the 4th, or get it to us through the weekend, and hopefully give us something to think about, a little more positive than that. I love the theme shows. I should do more of those, I guess. But in any event, I do have an awful lot of editing to do. I'm going to finish up the next time over the next firewall. I'm sorry, the next right angle, and then maybe get started on the firewall and get all these things out the door before I fly away to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho for 3 days, and that'll be a fun time. So when I see you guys next, it'll be next week. I get back on Tuesday. It's a possibility that I'll be so overworked I'm going to have to cancel next week. I don't know. We'll try not to. But it's always fun to talk to everybody. We do have plans to eventually get these things produced and sold. They're wonderful. They're handed in, submitted by a Strata Lounger. Did the artwork on them. This is a one-off. It's one of a kind, but we'd love to do it. In any event, thanks again for everything. We always like to end by thanking our members. We've got a bunch of new ones that have allowed us to do new programming. If you're one of those people that have been watching this stuff for years and years and years and had other people pay for it, that's entirely your business. That's how the model works. But as good old capitalists, I think we probably realize that it costs money to do anything. There ain't no such thing as free healthcare. Ain't no such thing as a free lunch, and there ain't no such thing as free conservative commentary videos. So if you'd like to become a member at BillWhittle.com, we certainly could use you. I've reached a point in the last several months, probably since PJTV shut down, where for the first time I felt like this is, you're getting your money's worth. I felt bad about it before, so the members who've been with us from the beginning, that 1,000 or so who were here from the get-go, who basically put up with the website not getting updated in 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. Bless you very much for your support and for staying with us, and I certainly know that you're getting more than you were getting before, and our gratitude towards you is essentially unlimited to all of you members out there. So it's always a great pleasure to be able to thank you for everything that you've done for us, and that we hope we can continue to do. We're doing a lot of good now. We have more members. We can do more good. That's the way I look at it. So with that, we'll close episode 122 of the Stratosphere Lounge. It's a big number, 122 episodes, but what's shocking to me is we've done 22 episodes since episode 100, which seems like was, seems like it was 3 weeks ago. But we're getting there. We've got a neat little studio in the back. I shot some video of the new green screen facility we have in the back. But we hadn't got the lights exactly where we wanted them until today, and I'll take a look at this, but I think this lighting situation is where we want, and then we're just going to go in and rewire it. So I'm not going to show the video I shot today simply because we've got power cords running everywhere, and it just looks really Mickey Mouse and Rudy too. We just had to get them lit and in position. Now we can straighten it out. Then we'll show you about the back room, which makes life a lot easier for me. Be sure to like us on Facebook. Carla's whipping me even from a remote location. I'm I'm being hectored and whipped and lassoed and corrected and steered and manipulated and bossed around by somebody who's not even in the office anymore. You've got to get me out of here. She's absolutely out of control. She's out of control. Somebody save me. Wasn't a business until Carla got here. And I know you're watching, so don't try to deny it. That'll do it for episode 122. It's always good to see everybody. Thanks very much for coming in and listening to this stuff. And of course, for this 4th of July weekend, all of you be good out there. Don't be too good. Have some fun. We spend the rest of the year lamenting the things we've lost. Let's go out there and celebrate the things that we maintain, because the things that we've kept are far, far greater than the things that we've lost. And that's why we're here. We want to get back what we've lost, and we don't want to lose anything else. So there you go. I think that'll do it. Thanks again for joining us on the worst produced show on the internet, and we will see you hopefully next week, but we will certainly see you next time.